India Today Global. With me is Shita Mitra, and the big question we're asking today is, will Justin Trudeau resign or not? Now, the Canadian Prime Minister seems to be in hot waters as his government faces the risk of a collapse. From the crisis of inquiry over foreign interference to a terrible economy to a diplomatic fallout with India and now a tariff threat coming from incoming Trump administration. It has been a bad cocktail of disasters after disasters for Trudeau. Now, in the latest, Canada's new Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh has urged the Prime Minister to step down. And this comes after the resignation of Chrystia Freeland as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister on Monday. Now, Singh expressed frustration over Trudeau's leadership and the growing turmoil within his government. While Singh stopped short of demanding an election or withdrawing his support for the minority government that Trudeau is holding right now, he outrightly criticized him for focusing on internal party politics rather than addressing the key issues that currently Canadians are facing. Now, what are these key issues? Well, Singh pointed out the struggles that many Canadians are facing right now, including rising grocery costs and the housing crisis. He highlighted that how young Canadians are having a very difficult time right now, even paying for their groceries or finding an affordable house. Now, these are pressing issues. So he blamed Trudeau for neglecting these issues and concluded finally that it was clear that Trudeau's leadership was no longer viable. Now, this is a direct threat to his leadership. And if you see the timing of his announcement, Freeland's resignation came after Prime Minister Trudeau asked her to step down as Finance Minister on Friday, offering her a different role in the cabinet. However, in her resignation letter, she clearly stated that the only honest and viable path for her basically is to leave the cabinet right now. And she also expressed concern over US President-elect Donald Trump's planned 25% tariffs, which she called a grave challenge that would require fiscal caution and strategic responses from Canada's government. So what basically she said was that right now Trudeau is not equipped enough or strong enough to respond to that threat that seems to be coming from Trump, and that's why we need a change right now. Now, remember, this comes amid rising Conservative Party's growing criticism of Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh as well. Conservative Party is right now in opposition in Canada, and what they have been saying is that they've been trying to corner Jagmeet Singh over his continued support for Trudeau's minority government despite the escalating turmoil within the Liberal Party. Now, Singh has been accused of being interested in his political gains rather than addressing the nation's leadership crisis. So, in the light of this Freeland's resignation and now Jagmeet Singh's criticism as well, the opposition has been planning to push for a no confidence vote in an attempt to bring down the Trudeau government. And this move could deepen the crisis that the Canada is facing right now, as both the opposition parties and internal Liberal divisions cast doubt on Trudeau's leadership. Now, I'll play a bite for you. Now, try to understand how real the threat of tariff is coming from Trump administration, in the words of Trudeau himself.
Losses in all of our communities for everyone. They would also, however, mean real hardship for Americans as well. Americans import 65% of their crude oil from Canada, significant amounts of electricity, just about all the natural gas exported from Canada goes to the United States. They rely on us for steel and aluminum. They rely on us for a range of agricultural imports. All of those things would get more expensive. 25% tariffs on everything going to the United States would be devastating.
Now, we just gave you the details of the crisis that is, currently unfolding in Canada. Now, to decode this crisis for Trudeau, we have with us our principal correspondent, Shashank Mattu. So, Shashank, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right. So, what we're seeing right now is that there's an 80% chance that Trudeau might resign, and he's currently, weighing his options, whether he'll go for a no confidence vote or prorogating the parliament. So, explain to our viewers what are those two options and how do you think they're likely to play out?
Right. I think that it's really a political storm for Justin Trudeau, primarily just to lay the stakes, in terms of who Chrystia Freeland is.
Yeah.
It's very clear to understand that she was, of course, his Prime Minister. She's been his Finance Minister, his Foreign Minister as well, really considered to be one of the most, if not the most powerful ministers that Justin Trudeau has. So, for example, to give an Indian context, it's sort of like for losing Amit Shah for Narendra Modi, right?
Yeah.
So it's having really one of your political number twos, as it were. Resigning someone who has been very closely associated with your government, really, any government, any cabinet, anywhere in the world has the Prime Minister and a couple of key ministers that become the faces of that government to the rest of the country and to the world. Chrystia Freeland was very much one of those faces. So her resignation has come as a major hit. It's also important to remember that over the last couple of months, I think over the last 6 months, 8 cabinet ministers have resigned. Right? Senior ministers have stepped out. They have, of course, some of them have gone to pursue other opportunities, but several others have stepped down, have said that they will not be seeking re-election because they are concerned about whether they will get re-elected, about the drubbing that the Liberal Party is expected to receive in the elections that are, at least right now, seem to be set for next year. The problems, I think, you probably would have already touched upon, which is the problems with the economy, problems with Justin Trudeau's leadership, and so on and so forth. So a lot of them now are pulling back, and others who are still remaining in politics and who are still keen to continue their political careers, who don't want to stand down, are now putting pressure on Justin Trudeau to resign. Several people have put their names to petitions saying that, look, we would like the Prime Minister to resign. Some have openly called for him to resign. We know that there was a caucus meeting where he sat down with Liberal members of Parliament and said that I am at this point in time not considering resignation, but I will reflect on the events that have happened because of Chrystia Freeland's resignation. So he's quickly appointed, political loyalists to fill up the spots, the open empty spots in cabinet. But that's where we are right now. In terms of what happens now, as you were very rightly mentioning, Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of the New Democratic Party, it's considered to be a leftist party. We, of course, in India know him because we consider him to be sympathetic to the Khalistani cause, yes, and to organizations that support the Khalistan movement. But Jagmeet Singh has so far not pulled his support because remember, Justin Trudeau has a minority government, which is that he has outside support from the NDP, the New Democratic Party. They have not joined the government. They used to be part of the government. They have now resigned. And so if they snap their fingers and say, okay, we no longer support the government will collapse and you will go into an election.
And this could very well be the next step, right?
Exactly, right. So you haven't seen that happen just yet. I'm sure the NDP is also making its own calculations about whether it's ready for an election, how it wants to position itself, given that it was an alliance partner of the Trudeau government. So a lot of things going on, but lots of people calling for his resignation. But at this point in time, I was listening to some really well-known analysts of Canadian politics who were saying that, look, there has been over the last 10 years a serious concentration of power in Justin Trudeau's office, right, in the office of the Prime Minister. And that level of control makes it very hard for ministers, junior ministers, members of parliament to try and unseat Justin Trudeau from power. So that's the really key issue here at this point in time. At this point in time, it still seems like, although there are many resignations and there's almost a certainty of the Liberal Party's defeat in the next election, it does not seem like there is a critical mass to push Trudeau out. But at the same time, he may himself conclude that after Chrystia Freeland's resignation, there's really no coming back from this. So we'll have to see how this plays out in the next couple of days.
Exactly. A lot of political calculations will go out as decisions get made. I want to ask you about the economy. You mentioned that economy has been a major issue and people are kind of trying to corner Trudeau over this. So what is the state of Canadian economy right now and how big is the crisis we are seeing?
Right. I think the big question that, we have been talking about over the last couple of months, especially here in India, because we have become attuned to what's happening in Canada because of our crisis with them, is in some senses the cost of living crisis, which has hit a number of Western economies, particularly after the pandemic. There was massive disruption to supply chains. A lot of people were out of work. Lots of businesses were hurt. After that, government spent a lot in order to revive economies and so on and so forth. So that was that led to inflation. Snarl supply chains also led to inflation as well, and that meant that the cost of living was increased substantially, and that meant that ordinary Canadians, of course, suffered much more economically. That was a huge problem. That expensive goods and inflation, hurts governments from everywhere, from India to Canada. Our politics is quite similar that way. So inflation, I think, was a key concern. Also, the the cost of housing. That has definitely hurt the Trudeau government a very, very great deal, because particularly in Canadian cities, which of course are supposed to be major bastions of support for the Liberal Party, it has become harder and harder if you're a young person or any person really from most economic strata to afford to buy a home. Rent prices have also gone up. Immigration has been blamed for causing a lot of this housing price increase. And remember that opening the doors to immigration was really a signature policy of Justin Trudeau's government. So if you think immigration is responsible for the increasing cost of housing, then you are going to blame Justin Trudeau, because he very much owned that policy. So that's
and he's gone ahead and also reversed that decision.
Exactly. And another thing I would say is, of course, what we would call macroeconomic stability, which is a big fancy way of saying that generally, how as a whole is the government handling the various instruments of fiscal policy. Basically, one concern has been that the deficit, which is that the difference between what the government gets from tax revenue and what it spends, has increased. So the government is spending a lot more than it has.
Fiscal deficit has
Exactly,
increased.
right? The fiscal deficit has increased. The fiscal deficit increased a lot. It was supposed to be 40 billion Canadian dollars, I believe. It has now expanded to, I think, somewhere around 60 billion. So they have blown past the estimates that they themselves set for themselves. And that, I think, in some ways triggered this resignation by Chrystia Freeland. She was being asked by the Trudeau government to hand out freebies, as Indians would say, DMDs, and she was not willing to do that. And she then, in her resignation letter, slammed Justin Trudeau for being...
called it a political gimmick.
Exactly, right? So for being gimmicky and so on in order to stay in power. And so that is also kind of why this is such a devastating blow for Trudeau, because your own finance minister, your own deputy prime minister, someone who's so linked to your brand, is saying that you're actually being gimmicky and you're not being fiscally responsible. And she was expected to then go and deliver that statement in front of the houses of parliament and so on. So I think she was unwilling to do that. She resigned, and she also damned his political brand in that sense. So it's been interesting, but those are the economic concerns that have been playing out in Canada.
Exactly. There's a lot of anger among people about not being able to afford basic essentials, whether it's grocery or housing. And of course, as you mentioned, the fiscal deficit has been increasing in Canada. Now, another point that you mentioned was about Trump's threat about imposing a 25% tariffs. So how do you think that factor escalated the crisis for Trudeau?
Yeah, I think it has, because the problem is that a government in America that is, of course, always has more power than Canada is, of course, one of Canada's biggest trading partners. They have a free trade agreement and so on and so forth. Trump has basically threatened a 25% tariff if Canada does not fix the border security problem.
Yes, and the fentanyl problem.
Exactly, and the fentanyl problem. So there is that concern, and the question does the Justin Trudeau government have the political power at home to mobilize government, mobilize the general public, and push policies that may be uncomfortable, and just have the, because what happens is at the negotiating table, often when in international politics, what you also try to gauge is your opposite number, your opposing leader, can he deliver the things that you are asking him to deliver? And in Justin Trudeau's case, the question is, does he have the political strength at home to withstand sort of the onslaught that is going to come from the Americans? So to push back against Trump and to potentially put at risk a large trading relationship, he needs political capital at home. So if he decides to give in to Trump's demands, then he looks weak. Does he have the political capital to look weak? Probably not. He doesn't have the political capital to, let's say, negotiate a compromise. If he wants to stand up to Trump and say that, no, I'm willing to put a trade relationship at risk, I'm willing to risk a 25% tariff, I'm willing to risk a slightly bruising tariff, because that had happened before. There was a national security tariff on steel the first time Trump was around. So do you have the political capital and the wherewithal to sort of rally the nation behind you, rally the government behind you, and say, we're going to fight?
Support to take a decision.
Exactly. So Canada is a very important partner of the United States. So if you're going to put that at risk and you're going to fight the Americans or play hardball with them, again, you need political capital, support with your own government and so on. And the question is, if he's losing his grip, does he have the political wherewithal to hold on? And the last point I'll make is that increasingly you're seeing something very interesting, which is that conservatives in a lot of Western countries are starting to hang out with each other a lot more. You would have actually seen that the leader of the British Conservative Party came to meet the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, the British Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. Came and met Pierre Poilievre, who's likely to be the Prime Minister by defeating Justin Trudeau. She also met J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. There seems to be the sense that liberal parties, as a conservative parties, across the Western world are starting to be a little better networked and starting to work with each other.
And that's a very interesting
It's
point.
a point. So
I'm
the
glad you
idea
raised.
is that could Pierre Poilievre, because he's also a conservative, because he's also anti-woke and so on and so forth, could he speak much more clearly and in a much more friendly way?
Also,
with
we're seeing
Justin-
a right-wing wave across.
Exactly. So can right-wing governments and right-wing parties speak more clearly and easily to each other? Will will Trump be more favorably disposed to dealing with someone like Pierre Poilievre, who is a conservative, rather than Justin Trudeau, who is a liberal and with whom he has a complicated history? So there's that question as well, which is, will Canada be better served by a conservative prime minister rather than a liberal prime minister at this point in time?
Yes. Now coming back to home, we have been discussing the Khalistani movement and the diplomatic fallout going between India and Canada because of the allegations which were raised by the Prime Minister. So now, how do you see this movement and this crisis going forward? If he resigns or if we see a conservative government coming to power, so how do you see the crisis folding out on this front?
Right. I think that the impact of the entire crisis on the India-Canada relations, I think, will be felt for some years to come. I feel Justin Trudeau cannot step back now on, as long as, I think it's often said that as long as Justin Trudeau is in office, the India-Canada relationship is not likely to improve, and I think that is broadly correct, because he put his political capital, his political brand, his credibility on the line by saying that there are credible allegations that India was involved
and
in
without
the death
giving
of
any evidence.
Exactly, right? So now Canadian agencies say that they have evidence, but that's a different matter. But the simple point is, if you put your credibility at risk like this, you cannot step back. So long as he's going to have to keep pushing India on this issue, and India is going to have to keep pushing back, so long as he is in power. And so long, I think, so long as his party is in power, because his party cannot disavow his policy. If the Conservatives, let's say, win the next election and Pierre Poilievre comes in, he has also at various points expressed concern about these allegations. And he said, of course, we have to follow it through and so on and so forth. But
he's also been very cautious in his
stance.
So
it's also not inconceivable. It's not impossible that he would look at this and say, like, look, this is a commitment made by the previous Prime Minister. He has mishandled this. He may not backtrack entirely and say, okay, we're washing our hands of this entirely. Let's go back to how things used to be in India and Canada. He may not necessarily do that. But I think after
he's likely to take a more balanced
approach. I think after a reasonable interval has passed, it is possible that the Canadian Prime Minister will look at this and say, look, India is an important relationship. I disagree with how Justin Trudeau handled this. Therefore, I'm going to try and make sure that the investigation works the way the Indians and the Americans have worked on this, which is like, do this quietly in a bureaucratic fashion, let the investigation go on, and let's see if we can try and normalize the relationship and also look at other things like trade, like investment, like the free trade agreement, like more defense ties. So, but a reasonable interval of time will have to pass, because the atmospherics around the India-Canada relationship are very toxic at this point in time.
Exactly.
He will have to, even if Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister next year, I think he'll have to give it some time, let some of the bad blood ease. Exactly. Let the air clear a little bit before trying to see whether he can normalize the relationship.
I think that's a very important point, that we'll have to wait some time and let the dust settle down, at least on this front. So my last question for you is, we have covered a lot of points here. Finally, how do you see this crisis unfolding in Canada at large? Summarize this for us.
It's a good question. I think it ultimately comes down to how strong Justin Trudeau will be as a political survivor. I think that the increasing concern, I mean, you see some of the Canadian headlines, a lot of them are saying, okay, look, this is the Prime Minister who's not going to last 48 hours. It's really hard to say at this point in time, because everything that you're seeing is that, look, he's already been Prime Minister for 9 years. You don't stay in power for that long without having some level of control, some level of leverage over your party apparatus, over your ministers, over your members of parliament. And we have that same system here, right? That prime ministers tend to be powerful and they have a very strong hold over their politicians. Will the cabinet also, because now with so many people resigning, young ambitious ministers or young ambitious politicians will be like, hey, if I actually align behind Justin Trudeau, he might promote me to a senior cabinet post. There's also that as well. You cannot downplay that. So it is, I think, evenly balanced at this point in time.
It could go either way.
Exactly, because Justin Trudeau, I feel, could also look at the broader picture and say that, look, there is very little way that I am going to be able to turn around public opinion in the next year and win the next coming election. So it might be a good idea for me to resign and for my party to move on from me, heal, and see what kind of campaign I can put up in the next year, hand over leadership, and then I will stop being the issue, because what's happening is Justin Trudeau is now the issue for the Liberal Party. So long as they're focused on internal divisions, they will not be able to fight the Conservatives effectively, and that's already a losing battle. So he may take some sense of responsibility from that, see that he's going to lose anyway, and choose to step down rather than be forced out. That could be a powerful motivation, but it could also be his view that, look, I I'm a proven campaigner. I have won several election campaigns. I'm a recognizable face. I have been Prime Minister for several years now. I know how the job is done. So I'm your best shot. Even if I'm a bad shot, I'm your best shot. And he may choose to hold on. So it is really balanced and knife edge. I wish I could give you a much clearer answer in terms of how I think this is going to go. But from everything I'm reading about people who cover Canadian politics very closely, it seems at this point in time that even they're not totally sure that like any other Prime Minister might have been finished, but Justin Trudeau seems to be fighting for his political
Still holding
survival.
on.
Yeah.
All right, well, these are a few scenarios as to how the situation could unfold in Canada. And of course, Justin Trudeau's position continues to remain very uncertain and fragile as of now. And we'll continue to bring you more updates on how this situation unfolds. Thank you so much for watching this. Stay tuned to India Today Global.